that discomfort is something that you actually need to push into.
Comfort is fucking crippling.
Go, we're doing something new.
What's up, dude? How are you, man?
What is going on, my man? Good morning. I'm doing well. Can't complain. Beautiful day today.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
better than the
envious of
freezing
that.
temperatures we had.
Freezing temperatures. Let's talk about freezing temperatures, bro. I'm so sick and tired of this, of the snow, the 9 degrees, and that's not even cold from what I hear. But I'm over it, bro. I'm 100% over it. You got 2 weeks of freezing weather. I got freaking 4 months.
Yeah, so it doesn't get 9 degrees, so we're just not gonna talk about cold because my cold is like 35.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Jesus, boo-hoo. So super excited for today's
Man.
content, man. So I think
Likewise, my friend.
for everybody out there, the topic of conversation is going to be getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think to me, man, this is something that is going to be like a long-term process, long game versus short-term game. It's not a
Yeah.
quick fix, right? So let's just dive right into it, man. What does being comfortable with being uncomfortable mean to you?
So honestly, it's not really a comfort thing, and that's one of the I would say one of the things that kind of people have incorrect. It's not a matter of like being comfortable. It's being uncomfortable and still doing whatever the thing is that you want to do. So for me, comfort is like my daily routine, what I would do just because it's not anything that you're striving for. It's just kind of comfort, sitting down, laying on the couch. It's not pushing yourself. It's not doing anything different. Comfort is just that safe zone, that fair game where you're not pushing any boundaries. And then uncomfortable would be literally the exact opposite of that. So when we're talking about actions, when we're talking about moving forward, anything that you have doubts on, anything that kind of makes your brain go, we're doing something new. That's uncomfortable. So for me, that's the easiest way to kind of break it down in terms of actions, progress, moving forward. It's just that. What is it for you?
Somewhat similar to you, man. I guess the way I look at being uncomfortable is just to your point, do where your brain screams at you and says don't do this or stay away from that, right? And that can be a plethora of things, man. I think that could be big goals and aspirations of large purchases, maybe things that you're not super comfortable with. Walking into environments that you're not comfortable with because your brain puts boundaries. I guess that's when I look at uncomfortability, I look at boundaries
Yeah.
where you're in a safe zone, and whatever that safe zone is subjective. And I think we've talked about it in past conversations, is based on the environment that you're put in. So anything that's outside of your normal environment that you're just not privy to, whether that's conscious or subconscious, and drawn that way, that's what you should dive into. And then just being comfortable, to your point, I think it comes down to routines, safe zones, safe people, safe answers, easy answers, stuff like that. So
So where do you think that that safe zone comes from? Like you can answer in terms of you or just in general, but like where does that safe zone come from? Like what is that safe zone and what's the area around it?
I don't have the data in my mind. That's a great question. I don't have the data in my mind that like would specifically give you an answer. I've done some research and had some conversation where I think like your peak time for the average adult, and the average young adult typically comes from like your teenage years. How comfortable you get in your preteen into your early 20s is like where that safe space, that attitude that you're raised in the sense of what you've self-created, but then it also comes from like your environment and what you're exposed to early on.
Yeah.
Whether you're exposed to like a high-end family where and they're just very straight to the point. High end is subjective. It's not necessarily financial, but really just
We'll
your
call it direct.
parents. Yeah, man, your parents, your aunts and uncles, the hood that you were raised in from a zip code perspective. You see that, so you set those parameters, like that safety zone of what you're accustomed to, right? And then on top of that, I think you're influenced by the content that you consume, whether it's music, whether it's videos, whether it's movies, whether it's social media. And that kind of creates that zone or that acreage in your head that allows you to stay in that safe zone or go outside of that safe zone. And I think as you get older, I think from a psychological perspective and a mental perspective, you are who you are by age 35. That's the common, and whether that's, listen, I haven't gone in, I don't have like a, data to support that specifically, but there's a lot of content and I could see it as I, being 33, getting 35, you get comfortable by then because you're settled in. Most people are married and or have been married. They have children or have had a child. So you've already established yourself in your career where you're on the up and up, but that trajectory starts to slow down. So you are who you are by age 35. I would probably say they say it's 90% is the general acceptance. But I'll say, maybe 70%. Some people nowadays might start to get a little stronger in that regard. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but you want to hear a crazy stat? So
Go.
in the last conversation that we had, I said an example from this book that Oprah Winfrey wrote about what happened to you. Your personality is set at the age of 6. Whether you are a risk taker, whether you play it safe, whether you are a go-lucky, happy individual, that is set at the age of 6. So when you hit these teenage years, your reactions are already based upon what happened as a child.
Yeah, I could see that.
Crazy, right?
So what do they say? You're most developed by age, like you're more of a sponge between 0 to 6 and 7 years old, right? So that's when you have probably no subconscious awareness. You just go, like there's no reasoning, there's no deductive reasoning behind what you do, there's no analytical thinking. You're just free as a bird in that regard. Before, what's funny about that? I'm just thinking in my head, that's when you start going to school from a public school perspective. Right as you start to get into kindergarten, that's when they start to put all these firewalls around you and say, you can't do this. You have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. You can't speak to me that way. You have too much energy. And they start to, that's a crazy stat. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. No, seriously. Like this is like the interesting thing, because when you think about it, at that age, you don't remember. I mean, guess what? Yeah, there's people out there that remember when they were 6 and 5 and 4. Like I think my earliest memory was when I was 3, and it was when I learned how to ride a bike. But really, it's like a glimpse of that. Like I don't remember the situation. I remember basically like one moment that it plays back in my head. It's like but in reality, whatever happened then, whatever I was willing to do, the person that I became kind of stemmed from what happened prior to that. And as an adult, you don't remember that. So when you become uncomfortable and you try to push those boundaries, there are feelings that are brought up, whatever those feelings are. Most of us as individuals will kind of set a threshold on ourselves and not push past those boundaries. Those thresholds are the questions that we need to ask. And those are the things that we just can't accept. And the reason I say that is because whatever those thresholds are were set long ago. You may not be consciously aware, like from the conversation that we had last week, of whatever that is. But if you have a negative reaction to not want to do something and it becomes a point of discomfort for you, that discomfort is something that you actually need to push into and figure out why. Is there a logical reason to it? Or is it just like we hype ourselves negatively? I can't do this, or I'm not going to do this. And there's hype in a positive way and it forces you to do something, but there's also hype in a negative way and it pushes you not to do something, right? So all of those hypes, in a sense, are brought to us at the age of 6. They're locked in 6, 7, 8 in that ballpark. Like that's who you're going to be to a certain extent. You're welcome to consciously change it and work on it, but it becomes a lot more difficult to work on it if it's not already set in the direction that you want to go, right? So if you are of parents who played it safe and wanted to, just get a certain job, right? That's, when parents start talking to you, being a doctor, being a lawyer, playing it safe, do you want to be a cop, whatever it is. And if you have parents that don't push you to do slightly more, that gets set. And it's crazy because now as an adult, you have a belief in something. You believe that you're uncomfortable and you can't like push past something for a reason, but you don't know what that reason is. And it's crazy. And this just continues throughout like the entirety of your life, unless you actually sit back and ask, like, why do I not like this? Why does this cause me to hesitate? And the only way that you get there is by pushing those uncomfortable boundaries, just like just doing it. As you move forward, you learn more about it. It'll trigger a memory, it'll trigger an action, or you'll just kind of get over whatever that was and deal with it. It's very interesting to me.
No, I couldn't agree more, man. And I think, you know, for the audience out there, my wife and I chose to homeschool our children. And there's a lot more thought process on the behind the scenes conversation as parents than what is globally shared. Like from an education perspective, I'm not a big advocate for traditional public school education. I'm a high school dropout. I did okay in school. I went to private school. I had, B's and C's, and I didn't really apply myself. I never took I'd study occasionally if I felt like there was a big test that I was super uncomfortable with. But in my mind, I could retain information pretty well. And to me, it was just multiple choice. And the only thing I struggled
Yeah.
with was just writing a paper, right? That was just not my thing. And fortunately enough, we have AI and we have phones and stuff like that nowadays. So I don't have to have that conversation. But one of the biggest things that I look at and that I dialogue with a lot of parents on is the boundaries that are inadvertently created by the public school institution and or private school institution. In the sense of like, I had a dialogue with a guy one time in a bar and I'll never forget it. I was younger, God, I was this was probably 7 years ago, right as we decided to homeschool Abigail. And I was still young in it and I was still being quote unquote manipulated on the outside edge of like my parents and people saying like, oh, you shouldn't do this, or why are you doing that, you need to put them in school. And the
Yeah.
guy had a great conversation with me, man. I'll never forget it. And he just looked at me and he said, dude, like you have no idea the boundaries that are created subconsciously by going to school, like clicks, for example, or the clothes that you wear. If you have a pair of Jordans on, if you have a pair of Vans on, the shoes or the jeans or the book bag that you carry, the cell phone that you have, like everybody is judging you by all of that. And essentially what happens is your kids will start to conform to that mindset on whichever area that they feel comfortable in because of the outside peer influence, whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah.
So for me right now, when I look at my children and I'm teetering on the edge of comfort and uncomfort in the sense of like right now they don't know any better when it comes to like if a child were to walk by them that's their same age, and of course they've got social media right now, etc., but they don't judge you because of what you're wearing. Like that doesn't come up in a conversation at all. So you
No.
could be well dressed or you could be just wearing a pair of, and I'm just using this for an example, but Walmart clothes and shoes. They don't care, they don't judge. And I can
No.
remember being back in school that I did. And it was just like, man, and that was before social media and TikTok and all that. I judged, and it was just because of in my mind what I wanted to be. Um, and unfortunately, there was consequences to that, both for other people that were involved because I could have been considered a bully by that, and or there was consequences internally for myself because I put up those parameters in my brain and in my soul. And that negatively influenced my growth and impacted my growth. So for them, man, I love their ability to be whoever they want to be, whenever they want to be it, and then they figure out and they define on I'm comfortable in this or I'm uncomfortable in this. And the consequence to that, and I'll put it back to you for a second, would be so my oldest daughter is 15 right now, and we're 6 months away from her getting her first job, right? And stuff like that. So like she hasn't been exposed to the outside adult world yet because she hasn't been forced to do certain things that she's uncomfortable with. So that's
Yeah.
one of the things that I'm working through right now. And just trying to get her to think through some of that. And have a better dialogue with, hey, like I'm really uncomfortable with this. Like, well, I'm like, hey, man, you got to speak up for yourself and say, hey, don't let somebody talk over you. Like, say, excuse me, can I just say something like in a very polite way?
Yeah.
So that's one of the consequences that I'm working on right now. But I couldn't be happier that they're able to define who they want to be, when they want to be it, without the fear of somebody else judging them. And because of that time frame between 6 and to 11 years old, especially for a young lady, because I have all daughters, um, they're going to be comfortable in it and not have to worry about the outside judgment, which that will then get them comfortable. By the time that they're super comfortable in their own skin, they're not going to be fearful of somebody else judging them. Does that make sense where I'm going with
It
that?
makes perfect sense. No, because it's like, so whenever that begins to happen at school, right? You have a group think environment, right? Where everyone's basically just interacting with everyone, right? And whatever another person thinks is great because it causes you to think and be like, why is this different for me? But in reality, what you're getting exposed to is other people's negativities. Negativity spreads significantly more than positivity, and people's doubts spread more than like the positive effort just by sheer amount, right? There's more parents out there that are doubtful that pass that doubt on to their kids that are then passing it on to their friends and everything else at school, more so than the opposite end of that. So, like the situation that you're in with your daughters is very interesting and great because they haven't had that group think mentality passed on at an age where they don't have an explanation for it. Like now, your daughter being at the age that she is, she's consciously able to say, no, that's not what I want. I know what's different, and then just make that decision. Whereas when you're in that group think environment, that level of uncomfort gets passed on to you by others just by trickling little comments over time that you just hear repeatedly over and over again, or people telling you something or making comments. And the thing is, like when you're a kid, when you're that young, you don't understand it. You can't process it. You just go, whatever. But then you start to think about it. And when you start to think about something at an age where you don't understand it, that meaning that you create within yourself could be completely different from reality. An example of this, like for me personally, was I'll throw this back into the sports world. Is when I was young, I was, I don't know, 8, 9, 10. I used to get together with all of my friends and we would play outside, right? I never actively played sports in terms of practicing in a league or anything like that. It was just a neighborhood kid that we went out and we played. And that's how I played. So when you do that in that environment inconsistently, you're not good, right? So I wasn't the best while all of my friends played in a baseball league and got practice and got trained playing t-ball. I did not. I started playing when I was 10, right? Which is really old for whenever you're a kid. So I remember that we were out playing one day and we were just, they kind of just told me that I sucked. And from that point forward until shit, I don't even know. I would say until very recently, like that was just a voice that was in my head. And I wasn't old enough to recognize it's not that I suck because I'm bad. It's that I suck because I didn't practice. It's reasonable for me to not have skills when I have not practiced skills. And as a kid growing up, when I was 10, 12, 13, 14, playing and practicing, getting better, getting those skills, the thing that I could hear was that you suck. So I limited my ability to gain those skills simply because of a comment that someone else made because I didn't have a point of reference to judge that on. Right. So it helped me in a sense that I like practiced more and I went out there and I gave it more effort. And that's probably why I had so much drive is because I was trying to fight that you suck. But in reality, that's not even what I should have been focusing on. I should have been focusing on like, yes, I suck. I'm supposed to suck because I haven't practiced. That's it. That's the end of it. Like that's where it ends. But at a young age, you don't understand that, right? And then you go out and then that comment gets reinforced when you start playing when you're 10 and you realize that hey, there's people that have been playing for 4 years and now that gap is really big. So then you see that gap and you're like, oh crap, I suck. Not hey, let's fill in that gap, right? That was one of those things that like it took me a very long time to let go of. And it's not anything that I could say that I caused within myself. Yes, I may have hyped myself negatively, but there was a point of view that I didn't understand. And at that age, I believed that point of view to be true when I didn't understand the full picture of possibility. I wasn't old enough. I didn't know what work was. I didn't know how to gain knowledge. I didn't know what the results of constant practice were. So I just took that statement to be factual and not changeable at that young age. Obviously, it's different now, but there was just like a level of disbelief that I had in myself because of a situation that was like, it was like a random comment, that it was just like a one-time thing, and that had a like effect over the course of years that took a long time to get over. And like it I would say, fuck man, I would say probably like sophomore year in high school was when I started to get over that, to the point where like I just out practiced that inner voice. But that's like 10 years. Right? That's literally 10 years of a belief of something that should have just not been there, had I had a different understanding at that age, which no one can control. But as an adult, now you have to go back and think about that.
Yeah, but you know what though, and this is, and I say this, and I say this when I'm looking in the mirror, right, not through the glass window, but um, having parents that are self-aware in that regard and creating a conversation and creating an environment to where you could
Yeah.
have that conversation openly changes the game for your child's growth. Now, granted, and I say that to the parents out there who have had parents or had children, like to no fault of their own. Like I get it. Like the journey, the road to success is always under construction, right? So from a parenting perspective, if you had children, your children are now fully grown, you just weren't self-aware, you didn't have content back then that would allow you to have this dialogue. So when I say that, it's to no fault of those parents by any means. You as parents did the best you could at that time, but you can still change the game right now. For me, you can still have the dialogue with your children now. And for you going that long, and that's I'm not saying that, I'm not saying anything negatively about your upbringing either, in the sense of like maybe you just weren't having that conversation with your child. But what we're trying to do as parents now, and like one of the biggest things that Heather and I are talking about, is just having a lot more open dialogue with our children about why you feel the way you feel, including right down to our 7-year-old.
Yeah.
Like, tell me, why do you feel this way? Why are you angry? What made you upset? And then sometimes they're just like, I don't know why I'm upset. I just feel upset right now. Okay, let's work through that. And
Yeah.
I'm not perfect at it by all means. Heather is way better than I am, but being able to have a conversation for you that you've now held on to for 10 plus years until you were able to unlock it just recently is powerful. Same fucking thing for me, dude. The difference between me and you is being adopted. I was adopted when I was 6. I have no recollection of like 2 memories. That's it. It's not, I can't say no recollection, but I have like 2 core memories that I knew and know I was younger on, but I literally
Yeah.
everything else from that period is dark until I was 6.
Dude, you want to know the crazy thing is though? So you made a comment about having those conversations, but like there's also a weird point that everyone can tell you something. They can believe it and they can be honest with you and they can give you positive feedback. They can tell you you can all day long. But that helps. And when the outside people are being very negative, that also helps you lean in that direction. But ultimately, like if you're uncomfortable, if you have a bunch of people rooting you on and you are still uncomfortable, it's because you don't believe what they're saying. Like you as a parent can tell your kid, "Hey, this is the thing." But until you as an individual see it and believe it, it doesn't become true. Because how many people are out there that have very negative families that are doubting them and pushing them in a negative direction, and they still become successful because of their inner voice. And then how many people are the opposite of that, where they have a group of people encourage them, they have individuals. Like I don't think I've ever been told in my entire life that I'm not going to succeed, but for some reason there was like a feeling of that in me, right? So it doesn't matter what anyone else has to say, because my prior belief was simply that that was the case. And in regards to, let's just say, baseball, having a level of success in that, like anyone can tell me like, "Hey, you're going to practice, you're doing good, you're getting better." I can see little glimpses of it, but until I decided that, hey, that's not true, I've practiced enough, I have this level of skill, it didn't become true to me. So like your outside influence has a lot to do with it, but until you pick, this isn't what I'm going to do, or this is what I'm going to do, and whatever anyone else has to say, it's not true to them, right? So
Well,
even if you try to explain that to your kid, like it has to be true to them as well.
in my opinion, and I couldn't trace this back to something specific, but I think you're not wrong when you say that, right? There's, somebody can give you a bunch of positive advice, and be really good at it, and try to limit your negative self talk, and by shaping your environment. But I think you could also trace that back to one or two times in that time frame of your life where you were so moldable and you were a sponge to where there was a
Yeah.
fear or of failure. You could trace that back and root cause that, and that would be years of therapy and somebody pointing it out for you, maybe, or you could become self-aware enough to try to backtrack that all. But there was one or two core memories that you probably went through that made you feel like that, and then you carried that feeling on until it grew, and it was very tiny. It was like a pebble in your shoe until it grew and grew and grew. And
Yeah.
despite the outside, environment telling you, no, honey, you're going to be okay. Well, no, mom, you're just mom. Like, no, mom, yeah, I'm not going to be successful. You're supposed to tell me that, just like you're supposed to love me. Right. So, like, there's that outside fear, but something changed it, whether it was a TV show, a friendship, a failure at school, a failed test, a failed presentation. And then that fucking feeling just started to compound over time. So I'm with you, but in the same sense, I guarantee you could trace that feeling back to one moment. And not that we're going to be perfect in that regard, because when you look at raising children, like I have 3 children, every time that I become a parent, each of those children has gotten a different version of me as a father. Because the
Yeah.
first one was like completely a whole test conversation, right? The second one, I'm like, all right, we got this down a little bit better. And then the third one, it's like, holy crap, I'm so much more self-aware by the time that we were raising Penelope, because of the time that's gone on and the growth that's taken place in the first one. So each one of them have seen a different version, right? So,
Yeah.
child one and child two might not feel the same way and might be slightly limited in the sense of, I didn't teach them as well as I could have.
Yeah.
But I can still change some of that now, if that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. So let's talk about, so we got comfort, we got uncomfort. The real thing is, how do you push past it, man? How do you get comfortable in that sense? What is it that you potentially do, or what is it that you've learned to gain comfort in those uncomfortable situations?
There's two things, man. I think first of all, you're just gonna have to do it, man. In the sense of like, okay, I'm super uncomfortable right now, and I use the terminology, I'm fixing to crap my pants. Like, I'm just so nervous, right? So
Yeah.
of all the content, of all the homework and research that I've done, that's the moment when you're supposed to jump in. When you have that feeling, you're like, all
Yeah.
right, I have to go. So step one for me is like, when I have that feeling, it's time to go. Right. So I'll just dive into it at that point. And it's not as easy as that. Trust me, there's been many times where I've wanted to quit. I'm not going to do it, man. There's been times in my job where I've circled around, a client's business a couple times, like looking for a way out. Like, nope,
Yeah.
I'm going to go drive around and listen to some music. But I'll take you back to my skateboarding days. So I skateboarded for a very long time, very, very long time. Love it. I'll skateboard to this day. And the reason why I'm so passionate about skateboarding is that, when you're doing something intense in skateboarding world, whether it's I'm going to drop into a big ramp, whether it's a big ledge or a big gap that I want to hit, whether it's a big stair set, there's a rail involved or something like that. The longer that you wait, the more you put yourself into a dangerous position because you're
Yes.
nervous. You start to overthink it, and right, and like once you start to overthink it, you're almost visualizing your demise,
Mhm.
the fall, etc., which then diminishes your confidence, and that ultimately ends up happening, right?
Yes.
So, like, whenever, I can remember being a kid, man, skating at Kona Skate Park, and I remember meeting a couple of guys that helped me along the way, and it's like, dude, whenever you want to do something, you just got to fucking go for it. Put your board up to the coping, put your leg there, and just fucking go. Because the first time you're likely going to fall, it's going to happen, right? And that's a metaphor for life. The first time you do
Yeah.
something, you're going to fuck it up, hands down. And if you don't, holy shit, keep fucking going, right? But then the second time you go to do it, guess what? That fear is gone. You're still a little
Most of
nervous
it.
because you're still a little nervous, right? But you're more nervous because now you want to fucking land it. You're like, all right, I almost did that. So you're going to go for it again. Or the other side of it would be, all right, I'm not even fucking close to getting that done. So I'm going to practice on something else differently until I can get that. But then now you're visualizing it. For me, it was like, okay, if I was going to go drop into a 10-foot quarter pipe, the vert in it's pretty, you'll see the vert's pretty steep. I'd drop
Yeah.
into it. It didn't fucking, we call it speed wobble, right? You're like, oh shit, that's not there. So then I'm like, I'm not ready for that quite yet. But I go back to the 6-footer, and then I would mentally put myself in that position where like, all right, this is it, right? This is the 10-footer. Take a deep breath and just kind of put yourself into that position. And then I could just remember I would fucking run to that ramp. And I remember the 10-footer that I dropped into for the first time. I would fucking run to the ramp, put the board up there, and then I would go. I would just like carry that energy over, and I just fucking go,
Yeah.
bam, I got it. Right. And then right after that, I could go up, and I can remember I would come back up, and then boom, I would go do a 50-50 axle, axle grind on it real fast, just like first try, just like that. So you got to go, and you got to do it within a couple seconds, in my opinion. Right. And then if you fail at it, you have to be able to analyze like, okay, I could do this. It's not as hard as I thought, or, hey, I need to put some more time in to figure that out, because I'm clearly way too far off. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So there's actually two things that I kind of wanted to talk about. So in terms of just doing it and sitting there hesitating, right? So part of the thing that we do is like the negative hype to ourselves, which is exactly what you were talking about. One of the things that I personally try to do, which is obviously like it's not perfect and you can't fully control your brain, but is plan for negative to an extent in terms of potentially the bad things that can happen. Like for you going on a skate ramp, like, hey, am I going to break my leg? That's a serious negative possibility. Plan for that to a certain extent as best you can, and make sure that you're not going to get seriously hurt or injured. But when it comes to doubt, it's finding a way to have the ability to recognize what negativity is not useful, right? Hey, red alert, you're going to get seriously injured and die. That is a good red alert. That is something to plan on. That is something to think about and process as part of your moving forward and whatever your game plan is. Like if there's a serious thing that can cause harm, yes, plan for it. You need to think about that level of negativity, but not the negative hype type situation, right? It's not about I could get hurt, I could get hurt, I could get hurt, and then not doing it. It's about what will I do if I get hurt? Okay, forget about getting hurt. We're not thinking about it anymore. Like, hey, there's a phone over there. I can call 911 if I get injured. Problem solved. Don't think about the hurt anymore. You need to have something for the negative, but it's not like you can't sit there and ponder over the negative like completely, because at the end that's what's going to like negatively hype you. So being aware of like the difference between what's actually useful and what you need to plan for and what's not useful and just going to pull you in the opposite direction. So having a level of being aware is very important.
Just to piggyback off that, I didn't get a chance to say it real fast before you go to your second
Yeah, go
point,
for
was
it.
the fact that naturally there's a progression in life, right? Where you start to step up incrementally, and sometimes you got to go for it and you have to jump off of a cliff and you've never started jumping off of, 5 feet, whatever that may be. So there's a natural inclination process that I think you have to go after. The other side of that though, is you have to look at like, what's the worst that can happen? So like in that example, graphically, yes, you could potentially break your leg, there's some more, but from a professional level of just doing something that's not as aggressive as that. So let's take skateboarding out of the picture or something physical. Like if you're giving a presentation for work, you're going for an interview, you're going for a promotion, right? I think like you have to take the fear of failure away and say like, I'm going to fucking fail. Like, corny enough, failure, the word fail is defined as, from an acronym perspective, first attempt in learning. So like, what's the worst that could happen? They tell you no, you don't get the job. And that's like,
Yeah.
that's what I try to think through now. It's like, okay, what's the worst that could happen? As long, barring that I don't drop the F-bomb in front of a CEO conversation or my job interview, I'm not going to get fired. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go through the process, learn from it, self-evaluate, and then I'm going to get the opportunity to do it again. So removing that shadow of a doubt, like my life is not going to end when I give a presentation perspective. And that's not giving a fuck about judgment and all that good shit that we've talked about in a previous episode. But you've got to say, what's the worst that could happen when you're uncomfortable? They just say no. Sorry, go to your
Yeah.
second point.
Or if it's reversible, just like adding to that, if it's something that's reversible, like you can undo it. Like, do I make this decision? Can I change it later on down the line? If it's reversible, it doesn't matter. Whatever happens is reversible, right? So if that's the situation, that's one thing. But the second thing that I wanted to talk about was in terms of how we actually learn, because it's very important in becoming comfortable being uncomfortable. So there's 4 steps in learning something. It doesn't matter what it is. As you're learning, as you're doing, there are 4 potential steps of your knowledge base of what it is that you're doing. First one is unconscious incompetence. You're trying to do something, you are unconsciously aware of how much you do not know, right? So you're not an expert, you have no knowledge, you do not understand what it is. You are supposed to mess up. That is your learning phase. Whenever you start something new, you have unconscious incompetence. You don't know, and you don't know that you don't know, right? That's where we start off. Step number 2, conscious incompetence. I am now aware of what I do not know. I know that I need to learn this, but this is the gap that I have. This is the greatest step for growth because now you know what you need to do, and being able to figure out how to do it is the question, not necessarily can I, because if other people have done it, you can do it too. So this is one of the places where we have a lot of doubt. That's where it comes up because there's a clear definition of like this person or this thing is not where I am. This is where I am. There's a big gap here that I need to fill. And that's when people get lost in that gap. Step number 3, conscious competence. I am aware of what I need to do. I know how to do it. I have to think about it, but I know what it is. If X happens, I need to do Y. And you're aware of it. So you have the skills, you have the ability. This is where I feel that I am at when it comes to, let's say, baseball at this current point in time, right? I know what I need to do. I know how to do it. It doesn't always register, but for example, if I make a weird movement or if I do something incorrectly, immediately I know. I didn't do it correctly, but I know what I need to do and I know what I need to adjust to get the result that I want. Step 4, unconscious unconscious competence. Now I am aware of what I'm doing and I know it so well that I no longer need to think about it. It becomes a reaction. Being good at the thing or doing what you need to do is unconscious to you. It just happens naturally. It's second nature. And the reason I mention that is because when you're uncomfortable, you're usually in the first 3 at some point. When you're at that last one, it's very difficult to be uncomfortable because you're just used to it. So, understanding and knowing those 4 steps and whatever it is that you're doing, because they literally apply to anything, is very, very important. If you know where you are, you kind of have an idea of what you need to do and you can check your emotions with it. Yes, you don't know that as you're younger, but as you're progressing, as you're moving forward in life, you get that knowledge of the place that you're in and now you can make adjustments. And that's pretty much it. Like being aware of those steps and where you are will help silence the mind with a little bit of logic.
Where would you say most people live at if you had to pick in those 4 bullet points?
100% step number 2, which is conscious incompetence, because that's the point where it's where you know you need to get better, but it's where you are aware of your gap. That's when everyone's self doubt is active. Once you get past this and you become consciously competent, you start to tell yourself, hey, I can do this. You start to believe, hey, I can do this. This is where that momentum really picks up once you get past that step number 2, where you're just like aware of that big gap. That gap is really a problem for a lot of people, myself included. Um, that's where I was for a very long time when I was playing, let's say when I was playing baseball, when I was 10, 11, 12. Like I knew that other people were better than me. And I'm like, well, that's where you win. That's where champions are made, right? Because that is the point where you have to tell yourself, like, hey, we're gonna do this. That's when you realize, like, I can see the next step. I just need to figure out how to get there. And that's where a lot of people get lost, man. That's where a lot of people stop because That's the hardest part. That's where you have to grind. That's where you have to overcome. That's where you have to do the work to learn the thing. That's the work. That's step number two. If you overcome step number two and you start gaining momentum and you get into the point where like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. Okay, I'm comfortable here. Okay, when this happens, I start to do this. Even if you have to look back at it in retrospect for at the end of the day, or when you look back at it, that's when you start to gain confidence. That's when you start to become very, very aware. That's when you start to know what it is that you need to do. That's when you start to execute. Before that, that's the difficulty. That's where people get lost, is that conscious incompetence. You're literally aware that you're not good enough at this time.
Couldn't agree more. I'd probably say there's an argument for bullet point number 3 as well, in the sense of like there's a lot more content these days around self-development, self-discipline,
Yeah.
self-awareness, where I feel like people know what needs to be done, they're aware of it, and they have the skill set to do so, but they refuse to take the step due to comfort.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be
Yeah.
had for that. There's an argument to be had. Not to say like, just depends on where you're at in your life, right? I think there's if you're looking at, if I had to put an age to it, if you're like 30 plus and above, 35 plus and above, you can debate that, sure. But I think there's a lot of people who are aware, man, but they become paralyzed or crippled by comfort, and they accept their fate. Not to say that fate isn't necessary, right? Amor fati, for the love of fate. But I think that fate is looked at differently, and comfort is looked at differently sometimes. So we could argue both ways, but I would actually say, bullet point number 2 and or bullet point number 3 could be a very healthy conversation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also say that it's part of the school mentality to a certain extent, kind of bringing back the conversation that we had, because that comfort only comes from good enough. If good enough wasn't a thing, we wouldn't be comfortable until whatever it was actually happened. So running into good enough is what builds that, right? When you have like the dead zone that I think for me in terms of like income, and I've run into several people, is where I am now. I realize that 200,000, 300,000, $400,000 a year in income is comfortable. It's a very deadly zone. A lot of people work, and you can at that level live a good enough life. You can almost get most anything that you want at that income level, and then you get stuck and don't want to push past it, because the sacrifice that you have to make from getting a job that pays you 200,000 to starting a business that's going to pay you potentially more is a lot. The amount of work that you have to do to go from employee to not an unemployed, but an entrepreneur is very big when it comes to not having that level of comfort there. Like if you make $300,000 a year, you're good. Like you got a car, you can get whatever car you want, a new car. You may not be able to get 10 or 20, but you can get the one you want, right? You can get the house you want to a certain extent, depends on how big your dreams are. But like that dead zone is comfort. And there's plenty of people that are stuck there, doctors, lawyers, attorneys, that may want more, may interact with more, may have a knowledge of what that more is and the freedom that comes with that more. But now you're stuck working a self-imposed 9 to 5 as a doctor, as a lawyer, or something like that, to where you don't want to risk that. And
Right.
that's a very bad place to be. It's great if that's your end game, right? If that's your goal and that's like where you want to stop, perfect. That's fine. But if it's not where you want to stop, that's when it becomes detrimental, because now, unless you can stomach losing it, you're not going to get past it, because you're comfortable. That's a very interesting place for me. I'm not there. That is not what I want. I'm striving for more than that. So personally, I have a very good feeling that I'm not going to get stuck at that point. But it's it's that comfortable zone that's kind of imposed by society, that like if you're in the six-figure mark, most of those people are very comfortable. Most of those people are out having fun, hanging out, have freedom, have enough, and that's not good.
Yeah, and listen, man, and just for the audience out there, like, you know, what you're describing is a financial comfort versus uncomfort, and your financial aspirations. For something that I wanted to talk about briefly today, and I'll touch on it. It's just like, you know, this is all subjective content, right? So when you look
Yeah.
at where you want to be at, what you're comfortable with, what you're uncomfortable with, for some people, man, being uncomfortable and comfortable is like, I want to go ask that girl out on a date, right? Or I want to be able to do it on my terms whenever I want, and just walk out and say, hey, and even if it's not that, it could be, hey, I just want to tell you that you're attractive, or it's asking for more money at work and just saying, hey, I feel like my value is more than what I'm being paid for, or maybe it's telling your parents how you truly feel, from being a child to being a grown adult, and some of the things that bothered you, and the difference between being blunt versus transparent, and in a communication aspect. Like, for a lot of people, when you think about this content, you just need to put yourself in more of an uncomfortable position to discuss openly who you are, what you want, where you want to be, what do you think you're worth, and just enjoy that. Right. I think happiness doesn't exist. I think it doesn't exist permanently. Happiness is a temporary feeling. That's one of my beliefs. I believe you have to enjoy your life, right, and enjoy the process of what you're trying to look at. But you define what your parameters are and where you want to go with that uncomfort versus comfort feeling, and it can be anything. For me, it's just stacking up the little wins, in everything, so you can build upon that. Because something I've heard a lot, when you look at people who are very wealthy or successful, and that's all subjectively defined, right? But like, if somebody were to give you a shit ton of money right now, it's likely you'd lose it all in 5 years. That's why most athletes lose their money. That's why most lottery winners lose their money, is because they don't have the environment and the process is built in place to retain that money and to think differently about that money, right? So we're just going to talk about money for this example. But for those who have been successful, it's been a collaborative process of stacking the little wins to get where they want, so that they have the correct behaviors and processes in place to maintain the result and or to drive that result, right? So to me, becoming more successful is, walking into a restaurant and being very specific about what you want, or walking into a dealership and being very specific about what you want, and not accepting what they have. So, like, key attributes, patience is one of them. Like, you have to be patient. Um, you have to tell yourself you deserve this. Like, there's a lot of behind the scenes from a self-talk perspective that I think you've got to look at. But like, you need to be extremely comfortable in asking for what you want, and you need to take what's yours instead of taking what somebody else gives you. And that's like an area of comfortability that you've got to figure out, because a lot of our law of the lid, we'll go back to that term for a second. We put lids in place of what we think we're worth and what we can receive, and we get uncomfortable asking for anything outside of that boundary or that environment that was predetermined over the course of 10 or 20 years. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So there's actually a way to, the easiest way to put it is like to get yourself to take that action, whatever it is. So I did one of the Tony Robbins 3 days events, and then we did the breakthrough event, my wife and I. And there was a thing that was an activity that was done. You can look it up on YouTube. It's fairly out there, but it's called the Dickens process. Scrooge from Night Before Christmas.
There you go, big guy.
But so in this, right, you have the ghosts and you take them to Christmas past, and you take them to current, and you take them to the future, right? So if you think about your actions in terms of what you're doing now, that way, what happened in the past with this action, what's happening now with this action, what's going to happen in the future with this action, are you comfortable with it or are you uncomfortable with it? And becoming aware of the result of whatever that action is will help you either continue it or change it depending on what you want out of it. If it's something that you're happy with, if you've been working towards it and now you're achieving it, that's great. But if it's the opposite of that, now you have a self-created gap to fill by knowledge or change of actions. And it's really that future, looking at it out 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, that really kind of sets it in, right? If I do what I'm doing now for the next 15 years, what's going to happen? And a lot of people have that realization at, your midlife crisis, right? That's kind of what it is. But creating that self-imposed through this process is actually very interesting, because then you can go back and think about, what do I want? What would that have looked like in the past? What does that look like now? And what will that look like in the future? And it makes it real, because now you can see the results of your actions, if you're able to visualize it further out. Like, now what I'm doing in the future versus what I want to do in the future, what does that look like? And you can create a vivid future for yourself, literally based upon understanding where you are, what actions you're taking, and where they're going to get you. Obviously, if you're younger, that's going to be more difficult and it's more of a dream type thing. But as you get older and as you process and as you're able to look back on your own life, what you did and what you didn't do, you now become more aware of what actions got me there and what actions would have got me where I wanted to go. And that's just a very interesting thing. Like, I would encourage some people to go back and look it up and do it. And it's called the Dickens process. You'll find videos on YouTube. There's probably somewhere in a book. And it's just like visualizing yourself now, visualizing who you want to be, stretching it out over the course of time and seeing if that's the result you want. Like, if where you are right now is not going to take you to where you want to be in 10 years, well, you got something to change like now, right? And then
Right.
figuring out what that is. So it's just, it's a very interesting um, example. It's a very interesting process. If you haven't looked it up, Dickens process, Tony Robbins, just look it up on YouTube. It'll change the way you feel about things, especially when he's kind of guiding you through it, because it's pretty intense, man.
So let's shift gears a second. Something I wanted to talk about earlier, and we probably could have segued into it a little bit differently, but take me to a time where you can say I was extremely uncomfortable, right? And you were, whether it was you were fixing to quit, you weren't going to do it. What was that? What was that time, man, that you can go back to, and like that's where you dig deep, and like that was the time when like I almost gave up, I almost quit, I almost backed down. Um, Tell me that story.
So we're gonna relate this one to sports, because still a work in process for me. So the negative the negative doubts we touched on earlier, and those kind of stopped around the age of like sophomore year. That's when the obvious gap became clear enough for me to believe it. And the reason I say that is because when I came into high school, regardless of what it was, my nickname, from the coaches, was literally CEO. They saw something that I didn't see. They thought that I was going to be running some sort of business. They thought that I was going to be some sort of leader, just kind of based upon my actions, something that I didn't see, something that I didn't understand. I don't even remember where it came from, but that was it. That was literally my nickname in freshman and sophomore year, was CEO on the baseball team. At that time, I did not have full belief in my own ability. I still believe that I suck. Perfectly fine. But that is when the work began to outgrow the doubt. And that's when the gap between where I am at that point in time and where others were became very clear to me, because there was decisions that I was making to try to get better. There were days where I would go, obviously, practice after practice, and then go home and then practice some more, where I was putting in extra effort. It was fun to me. I was trying to get better. But that's when I realized that other people weren't willing to do that. That's when I realized that there were extra steps that I was willing to take. That's when I realized that there were other people out there that just weren't trying that hard. So it became clear what work ethic could do and what it meant, specifically in like sophomore year. And that's when that doubt started to go away from me, is when I began to look back and realize and become aware not only of myself, but of the people around me, and comparing the two, not in a negative, I'm not good enough way, but in a, this person is better than me, but they outwork me. This person isn't better than me, and I outwork them. And that became real. Sorry, that became real to me at that moment. There was one person very specifically that was better than me, more athletic. They were older, yada, yada. They've been playing for longer. It is what it is. This individual had probably the highest work ethic on the team. And this guy played with passion. He was out there. He was our catcher at the time. And there was a game where basically he was carrying the team. Everyone was slumped. Everyone was down, doubting. It was a fun negative experience. But this individual was active, yelling, being in the game, being intense. And that was the only person that was producing. Well, since it's a team sport, our coaches decided that the entire team's lack of effort would reflect on the person that was giving the most effort. So the person that was giving the most effort, the person that basically carried the team throughout the game in terms of energy, was punished and forced to run. And since we were all a team and that was the person putting forth the effort, that's the person that got the punishment. And we were all sitting on a bench while this person was running polls. I don't remember the exact reason we got in trouble, but the reason was this guy put forth more effort, so he was the one doing it. And they were just essentially talking to us about teamwork and about putting in work and about what we believed in, while this guy was like running back and forth, literally being punished. He's the only one. At that moment, for me, that's when it became real. I stood up, forget what the coaches were doing. I stood up, started running with this guy. We're a team. We're putting forth the effort. We're going to carry this load together, not just you. Regardless of what they were saying, like, I don't even remember at that time. I just got up and started running. And shortly after, so did everyone else. I realized at that moment that it was just like the action, right? It was getting up and running and telling this guy, we got your back, bro. Like, regardless of what happens, regardless of what the results of the game was, regardless of the action and mindset, like, you're not the only one in this. Why are you the only one running? And we got up and we ran. But we were there for a solid like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, where no one was just like, everyone was just like, and I stepped up and started going. And that's when that gap became like really clear to me.
No, dude, smart coaches, by the way. Right. So the coaches did that intentionally. And
They did.
I hated polls, by the way. I can remember those for sure. Hated those, but 100%, they did that intentionally, man. I think there's a lot to be learned when you look at that. Together we succeed, divided we fail mentality, right? So, but just, being uncomfortable in that moment and being able to read that and then do something about it on your part, right? And it's funny that, just to sidebar for a second, it's funny that they said that you're a CEO and that you had that leadership mentality or that entrepreneurial spirit, when that's the same fucking thing that I said to you how many years ago? I remember that
6.
conversation. Yeah,
6,
same
7.
fucking thing. So, no, I mean, listen, man, I think I have a brief story that I look at that, and just to tie things up and kind of wrap it in a bow real fast. I was an outside sales manager for a couple of years, and I got promoted. I was super excited for the promotion. Obviously, naturally, anybody would. But when I got into that job role, I almost quit. I think I was 22, 23 at the time. I got the job and I didn't expect to get the job 100%. Like, I went into the interview, assuming that I'm interviewing against people who are twice my age, twice more experienced, and took the job. Fuck yeah, who wouldn't? Covered, 200 accounts, 8 different stores at the time. And I had a guy, and he wasn't an asshole, but I thought he was an asshole. And he was one of our best customers. And he was buying, he was my number one customer in my entire territory, man, spending, an easy $150,000, $175,000 annually with us. And I couldn't get the guy to talk to me. And in my head, I'm like, if I can't get my number one client to talk to me, why am I even doing this job? I couldn't let go of that dude in my head. And I used to like, this is the guy that I would circle around. And I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm not going to this guy's account. I'll just skip him for next week. Right. And I would skip him, and I'd hit him up next week and then I'd go in. Long story short, the reason what happened and what really derailed me from this, from a traumatic like I'll just call it PTSD, for example, was I went up to introduce myself. So when I got the job, I went around and I did what they call introductory sales calls. And I went and introduced myself and said, hey, Bob, I'll use Bob for an example for his name, but hey, Bob, I'm Kirk. I'm your account manager. You're one of our best customers. I just want to know if I can get 5 minutes of your time to learn a little bit about you. He looked at me dead in the eyes and said, you just wasted half the fucking 5 minutes. What do you want? And I shit my pants. Shit my pants, dude. And I said, you know what? I can remember saying, like, I didn't expect that to come out. I don't want to waste any more of your time. I apologize. I'll come check on you next week. Right. So I put my tail between my legs. I walked to the car. And over the next few weeks, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to get this fucking guy to talk to me. So that uncomfortability grew and it grew. So it trickled into, I used to avoid him and I would go to the shop and I'd walk to the back to talk to the boys, right? Because they were all my age, all younger guys. And I'd talk to him, I'd check on him, say, hey, man, you need anything? Hey, is Bob here? I want to go talk to Bob. Is Bob in a good mood? So I internally psyched myself out thinking that he was just in a bad mood. And that just compounded over time, man, negatively. So I didn't give up. Long story short, I didn't give up. Kept on coming back, check on the boys, bring them donuts, bring them lunch, whatever they needed, etc. And one day I'm like, man, so I'm in the back of this guy's stock room, and he kept a bunch of oil filters and stock filters and stuff like that for his customers. So I went back there and I hit a bunch of rusted filters back there that had just been sitting. So I just took it all, put it in a tote, and I took it to the store, and I was just going to swap it out for him, no charge, right? Because he's a good customer of ours, whatever. And so I'm carrying out a massive tote into my car, and I'm wearing a long sleeve button down shirt, a pair of slacks, and a pair of dress shoes, right? Of course, I'm nasty. I'm sweaty. It's Florida. It's hot as shit. I had to wear long sleeves because at the time my tattoos weren't acceptable. So he looks at me. He's like, hey, man, what are you doing? I'm like, I assumed that he thought that I was taking his filters back, right? Because I didn't talk to him. I was trying to slide it under the radar just to try to take care of him. And I'm like, hey, man, all these filters, they're all fucked up. They're rusted. I'm just going to take them back to the store. I'm going to swap them out for you just to get you some fresh filters so that way it doesn't impact your customers. He said, do me a favor, man. Can you come back next Wednesday and after we close at 6:00? I said, yeah, no problem. So I'm like, holy shit, I just fucked up. Because he's very short and to the point type of guy, very blunt in his communication. So I'm like, I just fucked up. So I went to the store, got the filters, took them back, and I'm thinking, holy fuck, what's gonna happen? I'm shaking, like, oh man, I'm gonna lose my fucking job. This dude's gonna if I lost this customer, I'm fucked, bro. I am fucked. So I ended up coming back, and the guy looks at me and says, I didn't forget that first 5-minute conversation that I met you. I said, most people, he's like, how many people come to my shop to ask me for my business? He's like, I get 80 people a week between a phone call, an email, or a visit from all kinds of clients between parts and uniforms and supplies and oil and equipment. He's like, I get 80 service calls a week and I'm trying to I'm trying to run my business. And these fuckers come into my building and try to take me away from my time. And he said, guess what? They all say they want my business. And I tell them the same thing that I told you, and they don't fucking come back. You came back every 2 weeks.
Just sticking with it.
And you actually, long story short, it's like, you cared about me. And I'm like, I'm in my head, I'm telling myself, if I don't continue to come back, like I don't have this job anymore. And then I really contemplated quitting, dude. I really contemplated quitting because I couldn't get this guy. I'm like, how the fuck am I going to get this guy? But the moral of his message was, I just wanted to see how bad you wanted it. I wanted to see if you really wanted my fucking business, if you really wanted to build a relationship with me, if you genuinely cared and had an interest in my well-being as a business owner. I just wanted to see that. That's all I wanted to see, man. So, and the fact that you came back and you didn't get in my face and you weren't trying to give me this fucking corny ass sales process pitch beat that I know that you guys are trained on, because I know you went through that shit. I've been through sales process training. I don't give a fuck about the corporate sales process training. I just wanted to see if you gave a fuck about me. And from that day on, it was a fucking light bulb. Now, granted, 1 in 100 of those type of relationships are built. But I took the guy's business from $150,000 a year to $250,000 a year, and got close to $300,000 before I walked away and got a different job. I got everything from this guy. Dude bought me a watch as a gift, and I couldn't tell him no, because if I would have offended him, I did everything for him at that point in time, right? And that was a life lesson of being uncomfortable that I took to this day, that has amplified my career in almost everything that I've ever done. Man, and it was at that moment that I realized that comfort is fucking crippling, because I almost gave up my entire career for that. I still hated that job. I'll never go back and be an outside salesperson specifically unless I'm forced to, or I'm selling my own business, right? Because there's just some things, in my opinion, that you're not in control of. If it's not your business, you're selling shit that you don't control. And you have to be ingenuine sometimes. Like, if I'm going to sell something, I'm going to be 110% passionate about what I'm selling, the people that I'm selling, etc. And that's a very tough job, because it just seems to be very fake in that mindset. So unless I'm selling myself or my own business in that regard, but that is the type of conversation for the viewers out there that I want you to look at. Don't fucking give up. Keep going and find out, because chances are there's another side to the story that you don't know, but your negative self-talk is telling you, don't go, you're not meant for this, you're a failure, you're never going to get it, go do something that you're more interested in, whatever it may be that you're telling yourself just to try to rationalize that feeling. It's fucking wrong. Turn it off and keep going back until you get the fucking answer that you were looking for. And that's all I was looking for.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
No, honestly, man, that's in there. Like, with my example, it's just like, for me, that became clear at that moment. And it was the gap between what people were willing to do and doing it regardless of how I felt. Like, you do the actions, you get the result. And that's when that became clear to me. So the discomfort it didn't matter anymore, because now I could visualize it. For you now became aware of it because of the positive result that you got out of being uncomfortable and sticking with it, which is interesting, because you actually went through it and got past it. I did, but mine was like a knowledge gap where it just became too obvious not to anymore.
Well, when I look at that too, man, I look at that same example, and I didn't really get a chance to like finalize my message in the skateboarding context, but like, I'm a huge advocate for skateboarding because of that. Like, you're going to fall 7 times, to land it on the 8th try, right? Like, like, skateboarding is the epitome of falling and eating shit over and over and over again. And then that one time that you land a trick that you've been fighting for weeks, months, whatever it may have been, through injury, whatever that process may have been, and you fucking land it. To me, that is just a metaphor for a life of being uncomfortable over and over and over again until you get it. And there's times, man, that I've landed tricks that I've never landed again. Like, I've done handrails before, and it took me time after time after time, after injury, after bruise, after sprained ankle, and then I land it one time, and I'm just like, yes, you get that, but then I won't land it again, or it takes me forever to land it again. And of course, the science behind it is trying to refine the process to get more consistent with it. But that's why I'm an advocate for skateboarding, is you just have to fucking drop in, or you have to go for it. And then over time, it'll become easier, if that's what you're interested in, into managing that process. I was passionate. I had a desire to skateboard. I had a desire to get better. I think that's another piece of it. Like, if you have a desire or passion in that zone that you're trying to get into, and you're uncomfortable, obviously you're going to be more inclined to continue to plow through. And mine at the time in my work example was that I had a family to feed, right? There was a lot of perks. So of course, naturally, the family made me more motivated to do that.
Gotta buy diapers.
Got to buy diapers. Got to buy formula. I was, single income family at the time, right? And I accepted the job, and I didn't want to go back and say, hey, boss, I'm not made for this job. I want to step down. To me, I just felt like that was just a fucking no-fly zone in that conversation, for sure. So, but I was young at the time as well. But So the fear of failure and the feel of that type of failure conversation kept me plowing through for that. But then I've used that as a metaphor for the rest of my life, where like I get nervous, but I don't get as nervous anymore
Yeah.
as I used to. I used to get sick to my stomach nervous, like, crap in my pants, all kinds of things, to where over time I got more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I've been able to translate into almost anything that I do. And now I'm just trying to refine that process at this current timeline to continue to level up into the next chapter of my life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, man. I can relate to that. Like for me, from a baseball perspective, like I got to remember being, for example, like pitching, being on the mound, and like I'm getting ready to start. I haven't started yet. I'm warming up. Like I'm nervous. I'm shaking. My mouth is drying out. Like I can't even like salivate correctly, just because of how like nervous I am. But being in that situation, like you have to, right? Like once you're there, it doesn't matter how nervous you are. You're here. We're going. So that wasn't like the ability to go back on it wasn't necessarily there, but the level of nerves is exactly the same, and it's regardless of what you do. Like one of the last kind of points that I want to make, and it's kind of just to wrap it all up. There are people that get nervous about going to the gym because they think about all of those things that don't matter. Can I do it correctly? You're not supposed to do it correctly. Remember, unconscious incompetence. You're not supposed to know, and you don't know what you're going to do. There are people that have thoughts of what if other people around me see that I'm weak or that I don't know what I'm doing, and in reality, that doesn't matter, right? It's not going to care. Like other people don't care about what you're doing. Other people have been there. Everyone that's been at the gym for 5 years, 10 years, whatever that amount of time is, also started, right? So they were exactly where you were. Those people aren't going to judge you. There are people that kind of slow down due to the pain of working out, the discomfort of being sore. And in reality, that discomfort is what makes you grow. And this is kind of how I want to wrap everything kind of up for my thoughts is when you go to the gym and you go for the first time, you don't know what you're doing. You're not supposed to know what you're doing. It's perfectly okay. What other people think and see doesn't matter for your results and what it is that you want to achieve. But once you hit that point where you start doing whatever you know how to do and you know how to do it badly, then you can start to do it better. You can start to work out differently to get yourself more sore because it is in that discomfort, in the pain, that the growth actually happens. When you are uncomfortable, that is when you're able to step it up. When you're in the gym and you lift weights and you get sore and you push to the soreness, that's when your muscles begin to grow. That's true for your mind. That's true for your body. Whenever any of them become uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form, when you continue to do it, when you push past it, whether it's bad, whether it's good, it'll begin to grow. Once it grows to a certain level, now you can figure out how to do it better and how to become more comfortable in that. You're never not going to be sore. The soreness is always going to be there, but now you can improve your form. You can get better reps. You can look up what exercises. You don't have to have all these answers when you start. You just have to do it and figure it out along the way. And you start to gain that conscious competence as you go through. That's just kind of the big example for me for this. And one last point that I wanted to make before kind of closing up my thoughts, and then we'll have you close up yours, is when's the last time you surprised yourself as an individual? Like seriously, you watching this, whoever you are, when's the last time you surprised yourself? As you're young, as you grow up, you begin to surprise yourself more because you don't know, you're unaware. But the more you know, the more you go through life, you become more aware and you start to surprise yourself less. That's not a good thing. As an adult, you can surprise yourself every single day in an action that you take, in something that you do differently, in pushing yourself at the gym and doing something new, and always finding a way to surprise yourself is how you grow, man. Like surprise yourself when you do something that you say you can't do or you think you can't do, and you do it anyways, and you become surprised at your own self. That is progress. Like when you're ever happy about an action that you did, that you took, whenever you are just satisfied with the way you did something or the way you handled it, that's growth. That's the result of growth. That's a result of being uncomfortable, pushing past it and going, holy shit, I did that. That is it. Like that's what you need to figure out how to do in whatever it is, whether that's learning how to cook a meal if all you do is like burn shit on the stove, or it's asking that person out, like just going up and saying hi. Like that's a step. You're not supposed to know how to do any of these things. You're supposed to figure it out, but you have to try it. Like you can read all the books you want, but until it becomes real to you as an individual and you take a step and you realize what you did versus what you could have done, you don't learn. Um, like that's not how we learn. You can read about it all day long, but until you realize what your thing that you need to learn is, it's not going to matter because you're different. You're not someone else. You don't have their perspective. You don't have their knowledge reference. You don't have whatever it is that they had to figure out to get there. You have to figure out your own thing. You can know how to do it, but it's not the same for you. So you have to make it real for yourself. You have to do it, and you have to figure out how to surprise yourself. If you surprise yourself every day, you're going to live a damn good life.
I'll segue into this and pretty quickly, man. You know, pain is necessary, suffering is optional.
Yeah.
Right? That's hands down. And that can be applied into any scenario that anybody is listening to right now in what you do. Stack the little wins, man. Just the little wins that you can go through, whatever it could be, and just reflect on it. Hey, I did this today. No matter how small it is, just look up the definition of compound interest and how compound interest and the 1% better mentality can apply to your life, and just make, little step progress over time, and just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's all I got, man. Until next time, dude.
Peace.
Peace.